Hello, I am the Lumber Snack, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about Genesis and Uranus. That's right, the seventh planet from the sun in the first book of the Torah. What's the correlation? What's going on? What am I trying to prove by or talk about by doing this? Well, here's a thing that I genuinely think is astrology, not what most people think, is probably and emphatically correct and real. The problem is you can only use religious arguments, but considering the pomp and circumstance of today's government and the general disarray that we're seeing and how everyone just, I don't know, I'm getting way more religious over the last bit. But anyhow, the book of Genesis, specifically the first chapter, what is it? What's it all about? Well, in the first book of Genesis, right, we see God, and God is creating the universe. It's all about using water and separating water from the heavens and firmaments and everything. But there's a few parts in the book of Genesis that I think are important when we're dealing with the planet Uranus. But a little about Uranus is that it was discovered in 1781. Now, why is it important that Uranus was discovered in 1781? Because the people like Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, Rene Descartes, freaking the other guys, Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, Galileo, none of these jabronis, knew about the planet Uranus. They couldn't have. But what's the big deal? It's just an extra planet. Why does it matter? Well, it matters because Uranus is tilted, it's on a complete 98-degree axis, and everything to do with it has some level of multiples of 7 associated, or some 7-ish thing. I mean, its orbit around the sun is exactly 7 years that of Jupiter. Its seasons are 21 months long. 98 degrees for its axial tilt is, another divisible number by 7. You got 17-hour, 14-minute days, I think, which 17 is a 7th prime number and 14 is a multiple of 7. But more importantly, its electromagnetic tilt is at right about a 59-degree angle, which is, of course, the 17th prime number. But why does that matter? Why does it matter that it tilts like that? Well, in the book of Genesis, God talks about creating a dome in the waters to separate stuff inside from stuff, outside. Let's just think about this for a second, because we're going to use some made-up terms by me. And we're going to call it MGE. That's magic, God, energy. Or for the blasphemers in the world and the disbelievers, we can call it the magnetic, gravitational effect. See, it's got the same letters. All right, maybe not blasphemers, I'm sorry, but if you don't think that there's one God that's above all, you're probably wrong, straight up. But anyhow, what is this? Well, there's 4 fundamental forces of our universe. There's gravity, there's electromagnetism, then there's the electromagnetic strong force or something, and the electro weak force. Those are 4 things. But there's also this dilemma that most of the people who are in astrophysics related fields who go to college to try to solve these problems, they're still debating about dark matter, which of course I call dork matter because those are the only people who care about it. I don't know why I'm more insane than people about the dork matter. But anyhow, let's take this into account. So you got something like the sun, right? You got the sun right here. And now you got Mercury as a little dot. And Mercury doesn't, I guess it elicits a very faint electromagnetic force, But anyhow, it's tilted, its axis is right there. So it's only like that. And then you have Venus, which is a little big, and it has no electromagnetism whatsoever, so we don't really have to worry about that. Then we have the Earth, which is right here something. It's actually way closer in size to Venus than that. Not precisely, but, it's like that. But it's rotating at a pretty solid electromagnetic tilt, so it'd be like that. Then you got Mercury, or Mars. Mars doesn't have an electromagnetic tilt. And then you got a planet out here like Jupiter. That's about like that. And a little fun fact about Jupiter, did you know that it wasn't even until 1973 that they found out that Jupiter exhibits electromagnetism. Look it up. Fact check me. There's definitely something about 1973 Jupiter and electromagnetism that doesn't add up. And so Jupiter has this like wild thing where it's going so, it's huge, right? It's rotating the fastest around its axis of all the planets, like 9-hour days. But like Jupiter's also like a primarily like chemical planet, right? Or like dust wise. But like you look at it as it's orbiting and it like shifts different ways based off of the sand and the dust particulates. And it just causes this enormous amount of electromagnetism to generate. But it's rotating horizontally. So we're going to keep it like that. I think that's how it works. That's just the MGE line. And you know, the sun has its MGE line like this. And we can tell that that's provable because our entire solar system pretty much exists on a pretty flat disk, which I think is because of the MGE, the magic god energy. Yeah, that's the one. And then you got Saturn. And Saturn's kind of unique. I guess Earth is like at a 23-degree angle for its tilt. Saturn does have like a tiny tilt like that. But then you get the planet Uranus, right? And it has its tilt like that. And here's what I think happens. You know, these are obviously planets to scale. Here's what I genuinely think happens is that in the nothingness vacuum of space, we have all of this just like between the sun, between Jupiter specifically, we've just got like ass loads of electromagnetism that's just constantly permeating in this area and in all directions. And then you've got a planet like Uranus that's electromagnetic tilt would kind of go over it. And I think if you just leave it all the way around and it keeps going, I think it just doesn't stop. I think it culminates. And I think it creates a dome. I think it creates a freaking dome over time. I do. I'm not afraid to admit it. Because it kind of adds up, you know, in the book of Genesis it talks about God creating a dome to separate the waters from outside from the waters within. And so at that point we would consider all this area the waters within and the waters outside. Because it's not like water, but like you gotta remember, you gotta think about it as if you're like the all-powerful God that we can't know, that exists, that is mostly just like, you know, a computer programmer bro at the very heart of it. They have to establish parameters, you know. Everyone likes to talk about God having a plan for everyone and that God's plan is great. It's definitely out there. Everything is scripted out for all of millennia. You know, God did it all. Well, I'm sorry. How is that possible without a mechanism? Every computer needs a mechanism, and there's nothing in our solar system that exists quite like a computer, like our freaking solar system. And then you got Neptune out here, which has a normal, and then you got Pluto, and I really don't count Pluto as a planet. I count the barycenter created by Pluto and the moon Charon, its own planetary thing, you know, because I think barycenters are a big part of planetary measures. But like, what does it matter? What does it mean if, like, say Uranus causes astrology? Say it's something that actually validates, you know, my lunacy. You know, you can't prove me wrong. Nobody can prove me wrong because the science doesn't exist to prove me wrong. It's just mostly opinions and lack of scientific evidence, I guess. But at the end of the day, I kind of just think that everyone's wasting their own freaking time anyway. And besides, what does it change if astrology is provable? Can you control the future because of it? No. You can merely guess what might happen based off of the events that happened the year before. But if that's the case, wouldn't it be nice to know, you know, a relative amount of like information about what you might be expecting? Assuming that maybe reincarnation's a thing. Because there's a lot more religious texts that have to do with reincarnation than you would expect. In fact, I don't believe in a hell after death. I hardly believe in a heaven, but I do believe in the pleroma, which is written about in Gnostic texts. Basically what I think happens is you freaking die, right? And then you get instantly warped to like some geometric area where you're talking with like basically an interviewer. And that's God, or at the very least the gatekeeper, who I believe in. And it's basically just an interview you can't lie about. You're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to basically talk about what you've done in your life, you know, what you've accomplished, your regrets. And he judges you based off of, you know, do you feel bad? how bad did you affect the people on Earth, you know? What are all these causes? And then from that point, it's like, well, do you get punished for another cycle of being on Earth? Do you get an easy out? Are you someone that was so bad that you're cursed to live life as a pig? Which is why I think that you're not supposed to eat swine in the Bible. I don't know. I could be insane. You could be insane. Who knows? The entire freaking world is insane. Are you watching right now? Are you paying attention? There's another correlation that I found with the planet Uranus, though, and that is the lunar nodes. Every time that Uranus exists in any given point, and you can kind of like tie the lunar nodes. I've got it going right over here for you to watch if you've been paying attention to that. That's basically just showing Uranus throughout the years, you know. I put this out, I think, 2024, because that was a day that we had Jupiter and Uranus go into conjunct. And peculiarly enough, the lunar node, I think it was the northern node, was directly like spot on at like either 0 degrees Aries or 15 degrees Aries. Couldn't remember. I think it might have been 15 degrees Aries. And so I just like started going back, and Uranus always kind of exists in a similar point that the nodes do, except every time that you go back for Uranus, it like flip-flops between the north and the south node every single time. And so what dates do we have? What dates do we have? We have 2024, 1940, 1856, 1773, 1689, 1605, 1521, 1437, and honestly it goes all the way back until negative 489, but I don't really want to write it all out because our recorded history only goes to about like right here. And what's important about these spots is that, you know, the last time Uranus was in the spot that it's in right now was during World War II. 1940s, World War II. That was one of the biggest America-defining wars that's ever existed, because we dropped some nuclear bombs, baby. We took out the Nazis. And I'm a big believer that the only good Nazi is a dead Nazi. Fight me on it. What's next? 1856, going into the 1860s. 1856, yeah. 1860s, we saw the Civil War. Another one of those majorly defining American wars, more so than the other wars. And what was the one that Uranus was in before that? It was 1773. And what was going on in the 1770s? The American Revolution. And so, you know, these are way more definitive wars than like that of like Desert Storm, which was stupid, the Vietnam War, which was dumb, World War I, which was just an offshoot of the Eight Nation Alliance back in the early 1900s before World War I. So if you didn't know, go look up the Eight Nation Alliance, right? That involved exactly every single one of the members of World War I about 20 years before World War I, and they were going to quell the Boxer revolutions in China. They all worked together to put down the Chinese. And one thing that after the whole cabal was busted up and, you know, they moved on, was that I believe it was the Germans and the Russians specifically committed major atrocities, like a lot of like rape and stuff like that, which is a no bueno. Everyone here at the Snacks the Druid channel is heavily against rape. If you're someone who's for rape, I hope the worst for you, and may God have mercy. No, actually, may God have no mercy on your soul. I don't care. Rape and any sexual abuse-related crimes are the most important thing, in my opinion. What was next? We have the 1690s. So this was, you know, before America tentatively, and this was the 9 Years' War. Another major war. Another major war. Another time that Uranus popped up in this exact spot. And then the next time was 1605. What happened in the 1610s? Like that, or like 1605 anyhow. That was the gunpowder plot. So if you remember the Guy Fawkes, you know, the anonymous guy with the mask, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Never forget. That was happening in 1605 to about 1615, as well as the Scottish occupation of Ireland. That's right, one of the most persecuted groups of people in the entire history of the world, the Irish, the actual chosen people of the world. Probably. I don't know. And before that was 1520s. Then you have Hernan Cortez smoking out the Aztecs, but you also have Martin Luther. Not the King, Jr. The Martin Luther who basically went up to the Catholic Church, stapled a bunch of words to the door and said, "You guys are dumb. Here's 95 reasons why." I don't know. It might be a correlating thing that all these things happen at the same time, you know? But my argument again is, you know, these are arguably the 3 most America-defining wars that we have fought. And I don't think people will disagree with me, you know? I think that the Vietnam War should have been avoided, you know? I don't think we should have been there. That was just the Cold War 2.0. Cold War getting hot. And again, absolutely no disrespect to anyone who's a veteran, who served and fought for our country, assuming you were good. If you're like one of those people who like signed up just to like shoot people, you're probably a bad person. I don't know. But like if you're just a general military dude who fought for our country to, you know, for our own American ideals, good for you. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness should never be infringed upon, I think. The Civil War, you know, that's when we decided that slavery was probably a bad thing. And then A.B. Lincoln got smoked by freaking John Wilkes Booth. But was it really John Wilkes Booth? I don't know. Probably. He was an actor. The gunpowder plot. That was literally somebody in Britain saying that the parliament is so corrupt, we need to take them out. And then was setting up an entire explosion underneath the parliament building, I believe. And then got caught and stopped. Then Scottish occupation of Ireland, where they just ousted Irish people from their land. I'd hate for, during this part of history that we're currently living in, for some, like, scumbag group to be occupying and kicking people out of their homes, killing them just for the fun of it. I hate you. Anyway, this is like astrology, I think. It's still going over here. Keeps Uranus in the same kind of spot. What I found is that whenever the lunar node is like anchored to a point, and I chose 15 degrees Aries, and you pop Uranus down, it always exists in a 7-degree window, right? It always exists in a 7-degree window. So to me, that is a center line at about 3.5, and there's side 1 and there's side 2, and then there's retrograde and there's not retrograde. They're basically just on-off states, you know, if you can understand any sort of like programming lingo, which I'll admit I really don't understand programming lingo. It just makes sense to me. But yeah, at that point, as long as you got everything running on a cohesive schedule as far as like all the events of the world, you know, you can make stuff happen. I think that's God's plan. I don't know. I have a very Keplerian approach to astrology. I don't think that it's because of the stars, you know, outside of the mansions of the moon. I think there's some merit to that. The nakshatras in Hindustan. I think there's some merit to that, but I think it's mostly just seasonally based. You know, it was in Genesis 1:14 that God drew lines in the dome to separate for signs, for seasons, for years, for days, for months, or for years, weeks, and months, I think it was, or something like that. But the more important thing is that it says for signs and for seasons, because as soon as you see signs and seasons together, that's astrology. There are 3 signs per season, 3 energetic frequencies. I refuse to admit I'm wrong because I don't think I am. I don't think Kepler thought I was wrong, because Kepler was one of those people who wanted to reform astrology. You know, I don't buy into the supernatural thing. I think that if you are somebody who gets your astrology chart done and you have somebody tell you that you're going to get all this stuff at this point because Jupiter is conjunct with Mercury, newsflash, you're probably going to be let down, and that's why a bunch of the scientists were so against it. Kepler was not against it because Kepler was smart. He saw the precision in the measurements and figured, you know, there's probably some merit to it. I think your astrology chart is a D&D character sheet. Yeah, we'll go over it more if you want. I don't care. There's a lot of it. It's all just numbers and spots and coordinates. And you know what the coolest thing about astrology is? is that there's nobody out there with the same birth pattern that you have. There's nobody out there with that same cosmic imprint, I don't think. You know why I don't think? Because they weren't born in the exact same direct spot on Earth, because it's all geographic and like coordinate based. You know, the Earth exhibits electromagnetism, and it exists in this major electromagnetic swell that is Jupiter and the Sun, kept in by Uranus. And if you are not convinced, which I'm sure a lot of people aren't, we're going to talk about barycenters in part 2. Thank you for watching. I hope you have an open mind, and I'm sorry that I ramble, but I'm not. Anyway, take care.